Well, I want to stay with this issue of America's treatment of child migrants. The United Nations head of human rights described the separation of nearly 2,000 children from their parents at facilities along America's southern border as unconscionable. But President Trump has defended the policy. He blames the Democrats and described his political opponents as obstructionists. Well, joining me now to discuss this, Michael Berg, an Associate Fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, and from Lubbock in Texas, Oliver McGee, a Trump supporter and former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Transportation. Very good to talk to you, gentlemen. I want to start with you first, Mr. Berg, and address this issue that President Trump makes, that this is Democrat legislation he's implementing.
Well, there's no basis in reality for this claim. It's not a law that he is enforcing. It is a policy that his administration, and particularly Jeff Sessions, announced only about 5 weeks ago, even though it has been put in place for longer than that. So this is a new policy at the discretion of the president, which is to deliberately separate children from their parents at the border as a deterrent for future migrants to come to the U.S., something that that the administration has stated quite clearly is their intention.
Well, Oliver McGee, respond to that. It seems pretty clear that this is President Trump and the Attorney General's policy.
Well, yes, it is. He's evoking law and order, particularly in trying to secure the international borders at the southern border of the United States. That's well within his Article 2 constitutional powers to do so. Also, he can use certain powers that he has with the veto pen to invoke priorities that he wants to achieve in immigration reform, with the border wall, with security, more people on the border to secure, and then at the same time look at some issues on sanctuaries and some control down there. If the president decided to control the borders, which he can do constitutionally under Article 2, he could send people safely to the U.S. embassies in Mexico. And that would bring Mexico right to the table. They'll have a vested interest to secure the southern border, because they would have the 7,000 folks who are not coming into this country illegally. So that puts a little bit of pressure. He's basically trying to invoke what we saw him doing at G7 and also in the Korean summit. He's saying, hey, we have to secure our borders, and you do too if you are a G7 nation or if you are in Korea.
Well, let's bring in Mr. Berg on that. I mean, do you agree with that analysis, first of all, that it's almost another pretty original bargaining ploy by the president?
Well, if it is a bargaining ploy, and he clearly thinks it is an exceptionally cruel one. He is essentially using children as a bargaining chip and essentially as hostages to get what he wants in immigration policy, which is a restriction to legal immigration by ending the diversity visa and by building his wall. Now, this narrative that we are securing the border and any and all policies up to and including child abuse and the psychological torture of parents is justified is legally within his rights, but as a people, as a citizenry, we have to decide if that is something that we consider to be moral and ethical. One law that the administration does not seem to be particularly concerned with enforcing is asylum law. The people who are crossing over who are seeking asylum are being barred from applying for it, and that is something that is within their legal rights under U.S. law. So this is a fairly arbitrary idea of what counts as justifiable enforcement of the law.
Okay, a lot of points there to deal with. Let's first of all deal, Oliver McGee, with the moral and ethical dimension of this. I mean, you've seen the pictures. What do you think when you see them of those children behind bars in cages?
They can be very emotional, impactful pictures. But ultimately, the President of the United States can look at the court of public opinion, and that's what those pictures would be about.
Well, what do you think?
But ultimately, it has to be about the court of public law. And that, I think that we need to really start thinking about what we look at in this nation on how we treat children, but at the same time, we have to look at what the president is trying to do. He's trying to secure the border from MS-13. He's trying to secure sex trafficking and drug abuse that's taking place at the border. And that is not about bad pictures of children, but it's about crime. and that is about insecure borders. So the president has to do the court of public law while he's trying to manage the court of public opinion, and that is part of him trying to put pressure on Congress to get on board and do this too.
I just want to stay with you, Mr. McGee, because I get your argument about putting pressure on, but I mean, using children as bargaining chips. Are you personally, I don't know if you're a parent or not, but are you personally comfortable with seeing those scenes in the United States of America?
Dermot, I hate to see politics using children as pawns to be able to get what's going on the left and the right. I think that's nonsensical. But we have to make sure that we do not stress national incomes as we are trying to take care of children, because this is a nation that takes care of children. I will stand to the 9 to the letter on that. But at the same time, we can't use children as pawns in Washington to be able to put dramatic pictures so that we do not secure our borders so we can provide welfare for our children. If our income is stressed, we cannot take care of our children. Right now, immigration and the border wall is the top issue in the 2018 midterms, Dermot, and that's exactly what this is all about.
Okay, well, Mr. Palberg, I mean, you both accept, I think, that these children are being used as pawns, but Mr. McGee suggesting it's the Democrats that are using them as pawns. If they would just listen to the president, and he was elected on that promise to build a wall, if they'd help him in that project, then these children wouldn't be suffering in this manner.
Well, the truth is this is a policy that was enacted wholly by the Trump administration, by Jeff Sessions. If President Trump wished to end the suffering of the children and end the separation of them from their parents, he could simply do it. He is choosing not to and using them as leverage to get what he wants in other areas of immigration policy. Since your other guest brought up MS-13, which is the boogeyman of the moment, we should stress that the people who are fleeing and seeking asylum are seeking asylum from that and other gangs in Central America. They are the victims of policy from the U.S. of mass deportations, which have created a security crisis in Central America in which we are not currently taking responsibility for. Now, I would say that the question of securing our border and does that justify any and all means, I would ask the administration if they would have any policy that they would consider not justifiable in the name of securing our border. Would they justify child torture? Would they justify arbitrarily jailing or hurting children in order to get what they want? This is not a question of enforcing the law. This is a question of what policies the administration thinks is right and justifiable to use. And every country uses a variety of policy instruments to regulate migration. This administration has chosen child abuse as one of their policy instruments.
Okay, well, let's put that directly to Oliver McGee. How far should and could the administration go in this policy? Could it go further? Could it start physically punishing these children?
Well, I'm always reminded tonight that the First Lady has a program called Be Best, and that's all about children and their safety. But at the same time, she stated in support with her husband that law and order is important. If we don't have law and order, we can't protect the children. But at the same time, I like to bring in what's Mexico's responsibility in this too. They should be, if we put the children in safety zones in U.S. embassies in Mexico and then allow them to be taking responsibility or taking care of their children, then they would be also having a vested interest to take care of their international border at the southern border and their stressed national income. But right now, they're with us, but the president has the Article 2 powers to send them back to the U.S. embassy in Mexico and let Mexico be a partner at this. For us to do it all alone, that's not the way to go now. We are in partnership with the G7 nations. We're in partnership with Mexico and Canada. We're in partnership now with Korea after the Korean summit. So they have to step at the table too to take care of children around the world.
All right. Michael Palberg, your point about these asylum claims not being legitimately considered, do you think America could be in breach of international law?
It is, and the United Nations has said so. We should stress that this is not just in breach of international law, this is U.S. law. U.S. law says that people presenting themselves at ports of entry have the legal right to seek asylum, and even those which are not going through actual ports of entry can still and do present themselves to apply for asylum. This administration is now jailing people before they can seek asylum and go through that process, which is the novelty of this policy. Now, one more thing, since your guest brought up Mexico. Mexico is largely enforcing U.S. migration policy for us. We have largely outsourced immigration enforcement to Mexico through the Merit Initiative and other public monies that we send to them. This is something that the U.S. population is largely unaware of, but it's also not something that is discussed, that Mexican migration to the U.S. at this point is a net zero. There are no Mexican migrants who are coming to the U.S. These are Central American. I think this speaks to the poverty of information about the exact refugee crisis that we have.
I'm sorry, gentlemen, we're out of time. Very interesting discussion. Thank you both very much indeed, Michael Berg and Oliver McGee. Very good to talk to you both.